Okay, folks, I want to welcome you to the Metaphysical Mysteries podcast. And, obviously we're the most interesting part of your day. And today, Tom and I, the hosts, we have a excellent guest, Dr. Kathleen Tallent Ph.D., a clinical psychologist. She's going to analyze Tom and I. You guys have quite a day.
So this will be a very long podcast.
Very long. Pretty soon, I'm going to shift to the couch, and it'll be good. So anyway, Kathleen, we want to welcome you to the podcast, and just say, hey, we're glad to have you.
Thank you all. It's an honor to be here.
Very good. Well, hey, you know what we do. We talk about the crazy stuff, and of course, because you're a shrink, crazy is good. Keeps the lights paid, the light bill on. All that stuff go. So anyway, we talk about everything from Bigfoot and UFOs and crazy spiritual stuff and demons and angels and healings and everything in between. And certainly this definitely falls within our range of topics that we talk about. Tom and I both coming from a law enforcement background, and I know you work with first responders yourself in kind of a more PTSD type scenarios, the aftermath of what they do. So why don't you just give a little introduction of yourself, where you come from, background, and why the hell you're here?
Sure, I will. So I have been very traditionally trained in psychology and research, a lot of research. I studied schizophrenia and worked with a lot of people with, psychotic disorders. So that's really my background coming in. Is I saw talked to people who experienced, extreme psychotic episodes, and, all of my training early, was in that. So I had already heard a lot, and seen a lot in that regard. And then I kind of moved into working more clinically with veterans and first responders, people who have seen trauma. And then I think in the last decade or so, maybe a little more, especially since 2012, I would say, 2013 and on, my interest and even my personal experiences have kind of intersected with the work I do. And it's really quite challenging to have, as a licensed psychologist, I have a certain swim lane and, a focus and professionalism that, I maintain in working with clients. And there's a certain protocol. And you can deal with sort of in religion or spirituality to the extent that the client wants to, right? So what they bring in to a session, you can kind of work with that. But it's not appropriate, ethically speaking, to just sort of go into other topics that they're not comfortable with. So it's an interesting balance and a lot of what I do as a psychologist is sort of observe what the client brings in, what their experiences are, and kind of where they want to take things.
Sure. So from a traditionally trained position, I mean, what we talk about here, and I guess, and Tom, you do the same kind of work up there in Massachusetts. So is there, have you come across things where, let's talk about maybe your peers for a minute and to say that they've come across things, or you've heard of things they've come across that doesn't quite fit into the box that's been in the classroom and the academia that they've been trained for, and they're either lost or don't know where to send somebody.
Yes. I think that depending on the professional that I've and some colleagues I've talked with, there's different levels of comfort in and interest even in dealing with the metaphysical. Some therapists, I'll say more generally, some of them don't even really acknowledge that or not really interested in it. It's like, out of sight, out of mind. They don't think about it. And others are quite interested in it. And so I've talked with colleagues, and so a lot of times people don't realize that, in the field, there is a contingent, I would say, a pretty sizable contingent of therapists who do appreciate that there are other things at play sometimes, that what we would call the unseen or the sixth sense, beyond our normal senses. I would even argue that, for therapists, we rely on our intuition, and those kinds of things, that felt sense in a lot of the work we do, that sort of thing. So there have been many things that I've heard of and kind of sensed myself also. When you're working with people, in such a close environment and getting to know them, I mean, you do recognize that there's many factors, the mind, body, and spirit, that are all working together. There's not just one thing.
Right. We talk about that a lot on the show, that, we have the three bodies, the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual up at the top, and then the mental, emotional body, and then the physical body. And your regular MDs, type people, they work on the third body, the physical body. And, for those that are working in the metaphysical sense, a little more esoteric, should I say, in some cases, are working in that higher spiritual body, which affects the other two below it, for sure. And of course, I know as either psychologist or psychiatrist, you guys are going to be working in that emotional, mental, the middle plane a little bit too. And that's kind of where you're at, which kind of makes you guys a little different than the rest of the, allopathic medicine type people that are out there.
Yes. And I think there's a lot of trepidation and sometimes even fear in talking about some of these topics because, oh, no, that's more taboo. We're not, that's not what we talk about, that kind of thing. I think that when you think about things holistically, that word, holistic, mind, body, spirit, and kind of, that's where it can become more integrated, and it opens it up to more, spiritual kind of perspectives, and you can integrate more of that, the higher level things. Mm-hmm.
So let me throw something at you. I was on the phone the other day, and I, of course, get these extremely, what people would call weird calls. So I've got some guys on the phone. They're chasing a demon through a house, and they're running and screaming and, doing their thing, and they get it pinned in a bathroom. Now, more than one person can see this thing, and it's up against the wall in the bathroom. It is what they called an absolute demon, that kind of thing. Now, if somebody would come waltzing into your office and say, this is what we just experienced last night, what would be the normal clinical response to something like that?
Well, I'll tell you, a couple thoughts come to mind. Someone starting out their training, I'll tell you what the response would be to someone who, is trained and kind of textbook, looking at that. And not taking other things into account, they would pretty readily start to think that was some kind of psychotic experience. Now, when you say that other people were seeing it at the same time, that for a trained clinician, that would definitely throw them off. But then they would still probably question, well, they're telling me that. Is that really the case? So
they walked in there.
Yeah. So often, these kinds of experiences, which maybe possibly things beyond our understanding, could get pretty quickly labeled as delusional or, hallucination of some kind. And so early on in my training, I definitely would have just been quick to more so label that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think for myself, I'll just speak for myself in terms of my own experiences, my own insights, and kind of broadening the way I look at things, taking everything into account. And I do personally, as a person, believe that the unseen is real. Okay. And I've had my own experiences to kind of validate that. And I've talked with other people who also have experienced that as well. So some of us are kind of in the same club or speak the same language as far as that goes. And so I wouldn't be so quick to make assumptions. I would more so, or judge necessarily, I would listen. And we are trained, even the formal academic training, to recognize that a person's spirituality is important. It plays a role in, how, in their mental health, in their well-being. So I think it's a mistake to just automatically assume that, as a professional, assume that those things aren't real. and you really have to find out some more information about it.
Perhaps if they were there and saw a knife fly across the room,
Right.
which
Right.
did happen in this particular case, and it was all on video. So I think, and Tom and I've talked about this because, being a clinician and all that sort of thing, wouldn't it be cool to walk into a, freshman or sophomore level, psychology class and they're all majors heading that way and start to talk some of this, what we call smack, start to talk some of this and show some videos of some real stuff and then go take them somewhere where they're going to get the shit scared out of them. And it's going to be really hard to plug that into a psychosis or something else.
Mm-hmm.
I really think, and I'm starting to do some of that with police officers. Because, they don't get trained either, they've run across the stuff. And, but I think there's a number of people, both in the, the primary response area as well as secondary, which I would put the psychologists, psychiatrists, and so forth, that need to be exposed to this. Tom, you agree with me on that kind of thing?
Absolutely. I mean, this is long overdue to just make people aware of this stuff. They can make their own choices and decisions afterwards, but at least get it out there that it's on the table as an option. I know when I went through my clinical training, my style was a little out of the box, so to speak, and I would drive my clinical preceptors crazy. I can't even imagine if I had brought this up as a topic. I don't think I'd have a clinical license today.
That's right. That's right. And you have to it's about balance and certainly things, and I think it's through experience and sort of appreciating that there are differences, in terms of how others see the world and how we've experienced, in our own experience. I mean, I will say that, in my field, I think that we often deal with, someone who's a therapist can often deal with things that are, I would call, darker forces at play, and other forces too, forces for good and forces for evil. I happen to believe that there is good in this world and there's evil in this world, and probably some things in between. And we do we're immersed in that world, whether therapists recognize that or admit it or not. Okay, and we have to be professional in how we handle things. We have a professional role to fill, but also we can kind of test that out and observe with our own, intuitions and senses. And that, I think that can just guide us to do a better job. I never try to impose any of my, personal or spiritual beliefs on clients. You're not allowed to do that. But there have been things that have happened that, that I've either heard about or witnessed myself that do go in that realm of kind of the more unexplained things that you have to chalk up to something else. There's some kind of spiritual force at play.
I would imagine that's probably not on an insurance code.
No, it's not. It's definitely not. And you won't see that documented anywhere necessarily.
I don't think you will.
No, but it does happen. I'll give you an example. So a colleague of mine talked about a client who was going through great difficulty and issues with a son. And they were quite tearful in a session and things like that. And all of a sudden, both the colleague and the client felt sort of a presence in the room. You can kind of feel that if there's that, that there's something else there in the room. And the client felt great peace and the sense of calm. And there was a light that appeared beside that client. And the client looked up and even recognized that was, and sensed that was their guardian angel. And that's what they called it during the session. And, they spoke to the therapist on that. And it was actually it was very healing for that to happen. Now, is that something that's taught in school? No. And that's something that just kind of spontaneously happened. But the therapist being able to just acknowledge that or be present with that, is something that could be life-changing.
Absolutely.
Client.
I point to, for those that are psychologists or psychiatrists that are listening, they always want to, where's the books on this? Well, one I would refer them to is Dr. Michael Newton, The Journey of Souls, that book. He's, I think he's semi-retired PhD guy. And, he did, I think it was 3,000 past life regressions and came up with volumes of data about, lives between lives and reincarnation, as it were. And then also psychiatrist Dr. Brian Weiss with his books, Messages from the Masters, that kind of thing. And he stumbled across that. As I recall the story, he was talking with somebody who was in a hypnotic state. And they had gave him information about his son who was deceased, and gave him very particular information, in fact, that there's no way they would have possibly known, which that basically set him on a course of what is this scientifically? How do we figure it out? And, he's written numerous books from the sources that he's got messages from. I think those are fascinating from people that are in the clinical setting findings.
Yes. I think that if you take that approach of being an observer and being present with the client, and realizing that, you don't know everything, right? You got to be open to what comes up, what comes in. Now, with that being said, too, you can hold a safe space. And that's what I mean about any kind of negativity. If you sense that, because there are people, clients, things like that come in, and you can even feel the negativity there. And you don't want that, and that's part of what your job is to kind of hold the space and keep it positive, keep it safe. But with that being said, there's life-changing work that can be done by helping guide somebody. I mean, we're all on this journey together. So being able to help them, come to some maybe potentially very important spiritual realizations or understandings. You got to be open to that, though.
Right. Would you say it's generally true that a lot of the clinicians in the field don't necessarily have the, I'll say, strong religious convictions, or do you think that's pretty normal?
Yeah, I do. I think it is. Many, I would say, just from my experience, the majority of clinicians, they just don't want to go there. They can be rather uncomfortable with it for whatever reason. And I think that can be very often a disservice to clients.
Yeah. Well, and Tom, jump in here whenever you want, but I guess I would say, obviously pretty left-brain people get into this kind of work. But you're really dealing with a lot of right brain issues, it seems to me, a lot of emotional issues and stuff coming from the other side, and you're trying to take a logical approach to it. And I understand that concept, but also to maybe embrace it within self might be a pretty good learning experience.
Yes. I think the more open that therapist is, for example, with their selves, with their spirituality, and being open, to the extent that someone will even entertain that there is an unseen there, that there are things that we don't understand, and maybe forces at play that are beyond, what we see and what we experience with our five senses.
Right. Absolutely.
That goes back, I think, to the clinical training that most people get in these fields, that it's very regimented. A lot of clinicians are looking for the dedicated roadmap that gets me through this.
Yes.
And what we're talking about today is not even on a roadmap.
No, not at all. It's off the roadmap. And what you'd find, when you kind of delve off that roadmap, can be pretty amazing. And I still think you can do that and explore that in a professional way. You just have to be client-centered and work with them first and foremost. So like the client you talked about, Terry, who, had all these experiences, don't chalk it up and say, oh, nonsense. I mean, well, he had the video, right? So that said otherwise anyway. But even if he didn't, you kind of know also, I think with enough clinical training, you kind of understand what the patterns look like. And some things aren't the norm. They aren't textbook, it's that stuff where you have to throw out the textbook and kind of figure it out on your own.
Right. I get called from all across the world for different things, as you probably know. And what I do get, and I've learned to go through a discernment process very quickly, because I usually do not have the time. They're not going to come into my office for a sit down like they would in a traditional sense. So within just moments of talking to people, I got to figure it out really quickly. Is this a psychological issue or is this a spiritual issue? And so I really kind of take a very rapid assessment approach to this. And what I found here recently with some people from overseas, as well as some in the States that I've worked with, they've got referred to me from people that just thought it was over their pay grade. And next thing you know, it's on Terry's desk. That happens a bunch. And anyway, but I'm getting the kind of a split personality disorder type situation, you know, the multiple personalities coming out. And once I start quizzing them a little bit pretty heavily, and it's a pretty rough thing to watch, but it's how I do it so I can get through it very, very quickly. I find that, of course, they've had some major stressors in their life a couple of years back, and they've created this alter ego of some sort. And sometimes they've even done some crime, and they hide themselves with an attachment and create a whole personality for that. And they think it's an attachment, like a demonic attachment, when in fact, I know the difference. And they're far from having a demonic attachment. That's when I send them right back to Kathleen's office.
Right, right. It sounds like in that case, it's what it's almost like a fracturing of the self, like this compartmentalizing due to trauma, which is a really common response to trauma, severe trauma. But it's interesting how some people will attribute that to like a demonic force, and so it's. In other words, it's like easier for them to say it's that versus actually dealing with their own internal stuff.
Sure.
And because they don't have to take any responsibility for it.
Right.
And there is a group of people like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. Well, and I would tell clinicians if they ask me because I'm usually having to make house calls, or I can do it remotely over the phone for the most part. But I do get asked that question, how would we know? And I said, well, oftentimes an entity is going to know things. There is no possible way that individual is going to know. So, if they start telling you, hey, you're wearing red underwear today, there's no way. You know what I'm saying? There's no way. It's an entity, obviously. And they're telling you, when your mother's birthday was, that kind of thing. That's a little freaky. And so, and they give you the name of somebody you dated in high school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Well, then we're not talking about somebody with a mental disorder. We're talking about a whole different animal that's attached to this dude or dudette, and we need to get rid of it.
Yeah, that's right. And so you have to look at the context.
I don't think most of them are ready to handle that.
No, I don't think they are.
I talked to one minister person who was a director. And when I say director, they're like over 50 other ministers, that kind of thing. And I asked, I said, so what would happen if one of your people came across one of these situations? And I said, were you trained in any of that? I mean, they go through their basic schools for church and so forth. They said, no, they're going to run for the woods and they're going to call you. And that's what I got told. And sure enough, they've had those things. And they really, I know the Catholic Church, the Pope, he's authorized another, 200 more exorcists because they've had such an uptick in it. And they did a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So now whether people believe it's a psychological, psychosomatic, I don't know, whatever, blah, blah you want to put on it, great. But in some cases, when you're starting to get poltergeist activity in a household, I have some challenges with that. And there's some energetics that go along with that I have my own theories on that I would really like to prove someday. And I don't know, Tommy, if you've got anything on that you've dealt with, but in police work or clinically.
Not so much the poltergeist type of thing. When I think about metaphysical and the law enforcement and the clinical work, I find a lot of times it's the knowing sense when I'm working with someone. Kathleen, you said you've worked with a lot of public safety people and veterans, which is pretty much my specialty. And along that line, what do you find when you work with those groups and you try to introduce this side of the house to the group?
Well, it's challenging for most of them. I'll tell you, one of the most challenging things that I personally faced when I worked with them is often because of what they've seen or what they've experienced, it challenges their faith or almost, leads them to question the existence of God or whether there is a God. And if they think there is a God, they're mad at God, okay, for what happened. So dealing with things at that level, and that's when I can personally try to work with that a little bit, but that is when I've called in. For example, there's a first responder I worked with who we called in a pastor, someone he really trusted a lot. And I actually met with the pastor and had some conversations and things like that, and learned a lot. It was very interesting. And but they helped guide him because they're in a dark place, and they've seen dark things. So that's understandable. They've seen the worst of people's lives, the worst, what they see. First responders, for example, see more in one shift than most people see in their lifetime. And so being able to handle that and cope with that, it can be a big burden on them. And I do think it can affect them spiritually. They call it moral injuries too. When they see something that's morally wrong, all the different, horrible things that they encounter. And it does leave them sometimes, feeling this sense of brokenness spiritually, if they even want to go there at all.
Exactly. And for the listeners, what Kathleen's describing is what we know as crisis of faith. And so what happens is someone has an experience that challenges their belief system, their values, their rights and wrongs, if you will. And what I found, it's a polarization effect. They either go to this God, and I use that term loosely, whatever that means to you. If they were so good, this wouldn't have happened. I'm all done with this. And I've seen it go the other way, where people overly rely on their religion to get through the next day. So, using the traditional public safety Catholic, I would say, where they will show up for wakes, funerals, weddings,
Yes.
And a couple of times a month, maybe. All of a sudden they need to go to mass 6 times a week to feel comforted. And so I've watched it go both ways. And a lot of times it's to try to manage that moral injury that you're describing. In the military, we used to call it psychological injury. But it's truly a moral injury, the challenge to I should have or I shouldn't have, or somebody else should have or shouldn't have.
Yes.
Very common in the combat theater, where people are asked to do things that they don't have to see or witness back home.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's a great against your norms. And so very powerful when you deal with the folks around this.
Yes. And when you think about things in that holistic and even, energetically, okay, that if someone is holding on to something, so thoughts are things, right? So those thoughts, those memories, they can hold on to them and kind of get stuck in them. And it can affect everything, right? It can affect, when you think about their energetic balance, their alignment, things that a lot of times, I'll intuit or think, from my own personal spirituality, I can't help sometimes but kind of see how, well, this person's out of alignment, but they don't see it, and they that stuff's, a bunch of mumbo jumbo, and they're not there yet. So you don't, you can't force that either, because that would make them very uncomfortable and probably scary.
Exactly. And what I find is most people today, I'm not sure your experience, but they don't identify themselves as religious. They identify as spiritual.
Right.
And however they interpret that.
Right. Yes, they do. And one of the things that I personally, it's been kind of an interesting challenge for me, is that with my spirituality, for example, I'm a Christian. Okay. I follow Jesus Christ in my heart, and he's my Lord and Savior. And my sort of, it's not religion. It is just in my heart, my knowing. And that's the place I come from as a person. As I work with other people, I find that they don't want to talk about God at all. They even deny, whatever their God, whenever their God is, or, they embrace their own unique spirituality. They're much more comfortable. So everybody's kind of having different conversations and maybe talking about their own version of what God is. And it's really hard sometimes to get on the same page. And for me, I'm trained. I don't impose any of my own personal views. Now, when I work with someone who happens to be Christian, we can kind of speak the same language, and I'm feeling like I can go there, but otherwise I don't. And so I think it's especially challenging when someone just is in a very negative place all the way around, and they don't believe in God, and they don't have anything to hold on to, and they're stuck, and they keep repeating the same patterns, and they don't have, and maybe all these things are happening in their life that if they had some relationship, with God or some spirituality, you could say, it could get them through some really tough times. That's some of the hardest time that I have is, kind of seeing where they're at. If they have no hope sometimes when it comes to that, and you can't force, nor should you force that on anybody either,
Right.
but they really get stuck.
Yeah,
when that happens.
I was going to say, I get a lot of that in my wheelhouse. Needless to say, people come in and they don't know what God is, who it is, what the universe is, and I get a lot of that. So typically within a few minutes, I've done it so much that we're able to settle them out on that. Ask a few questions. I do a little thing called tactical imaging on them, and they come to the conclusions pretty quick themselves as to what's what. But if you were running across, well, and let me even say, I'm going to go just briefly kind of off topic for just a minute, and say that, drug addicts is an example that end up with, psychiatrists, psychologists, talking to them, counselors, whatever the case may be. Their recidivism rate is very high if they're not in a spiritual setting, because they can use that, as you kind of indicated, to really lean hard on, and for whatever that works for them, whatever version of that. I mean, there's 12 major religions of the world, and then other quasi versions. But as I've seen, knowing a lot of counselors in that range, they're like, seriously, if there's no God involved, so to speak, or higher power, creator, whatever you want to call it, they're coming back. They're going to go out and make the same mistakes. But the ones that tend to have the greatest success tend to have that higher concept and power involved.
Yes, we call that a protective factor. It's just something that buttresses them, it supports them through anything, through rough times. And yeah, I think, and the research and, in the field bears that out, that they will have, continue to use or have significant problems with, if they don't have some, it's such a strong source of support when they do have that spirituality.
Right. Absolutely. So if you had somebody, let's say a fellow clinician, and they were having somebody with some real challenges that really looked like it was more spiritual than psychological, how would you go about maybe referencing somebody to them that might be really helpful? What approach would you take to, do it the right way, so to speak?
Right. I would first start with where they are, because people can have very different views on, let's say, spirituality, and some of them don't want to go there at all. I found that some people get even repelled by that. I mean, even the thought of it, if you bring it up, and I have to ask it in a very kind of careful way sometimes, like, do you have a religious faith, or some kind of real standard kind of question, because I don't know. I just see that a lot of people are really not wanting to go there. So, but as part of my job, that you do need to, I think, to do a good job, understand and try to explore that with them. Some people don't want to go there. So I would start with that and asking them, and kind of just seeing where they go with that, if that's something that's important to them. Because if it's not, I don't go there. And it's not, so I wouldn't even make that kind of recommendation or begin to, unless the client gave me indication that was something that was important to them. You got to respect that. Some people don't want to go there at all, even if you feel like at some level they would benefit from something like that, or a consult with someone, or some sort of exorcism or whatever you might want to throw at them. But you can't impose that. And that makes it hard too, because some people embrace that stuff, and you see them maybe, whatever spirituality, they embrace it, and, you see improvement. And other people, you see them stuck.
Sure. Well, I know that, and Tom does this a lot, and I'll let him take it after I get done with this statement, but they're using EFT, TFT, those kind of things where they're doing tapping, and they're, resetting the flow there of energy. And of course, Chinese medicine with acupuncture and the like,
Mhm.
but used for centuries successfully in many cases.
Yes.
And so is that religion? Not really. No, I don't think so.
Mhm.
But they could think that was chicken bone medicine too,
Mhm. Mhm.
as Tom calls it. And so anyway, I'll let you take that, Tom, see what you think with that.
Yeah, that's been my history with that, using at least with the public safety and veteran population.
Mhm.
They take a look at that stuff and they think it's witchcraft or voodoo
Mhm.
or something. They have no clue what the heck just happened to them because they're not expecting such rapid results.
Mhm. That's
And
right.
it's really just about balancing the body and letting it get back to what it wants to do. I always say it's above my pay grade. I'm not doing anything. I'm
Right.
just a
That's
messenger.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And some people are more open to that. So you could be, and who knows, we may be operating on multiple levels. We likely are when we do any of those interventions. But whatever, it's like speaking their language, wherever they're coming from, whatever their comfort zone is, that's kind of how you can integrate things in. And, and if they don't want it, it's off the table. But so that um, falls in line with your question, Terry, about when do you bring somebody in and who do you bring in? Well, that would be a conversation with that person. If the person, now I've worked with clients before who are very open to, different types of metaphysical things. And so I don't necessarily encourage that, like I just kind of listen and observe and work with them within my swim lane with that. But one example is I had a client before who described to me a very vivid awakening experience that they had where they were outside and the weather, it started to rain, and they described how they had kind of felt at one with the universe and all these things. And I think that, I didn't write that off as being psychotic. Somebody else hearing that might have thought, and made those kinds of calls. But I listened to, with that within the whole context of what they were, their life, and realized that this was a very significant spiritual growth experience for them, and tried to help them find meaning around it. So rather than, sweeping it under the rug and, and writing it off, I think too often, for whatever reason, in therapists and different people in the helping professions will tend to sweep those things under the rug
Right.
more often than they should.
From their own discomfort more than
Mhm.
anything else.
Yes, absolutely.
I think you hit a good thing for what's happening in the world today. You talked about public safety people experiencing more stress and trauma in one day than the general public might in a lifetime.
Yes.
And so, I see a disconnect with what's going on, of course, in the police world right now. Police are kind of the scapegoats. They're not, so it's a bigger problem than that. But I think these people are seeing things that are really, when you end up, having to address taking somebody into custody, for example, it's ugly. It's not like TV, and it gets ugly, and it gets ugly really quick. I would say honestly, though, that because people aren't used to that, it probably means the police have been doing their jobs because it's not crawled up on their doorstep and they're not used to it. So what a police officer might see that looks horrendous to an average bystander who just doesn't do that job. They're not sitting any time in the squad car at all. There's a disconnect there. And it's more like if all of a sudden a brain was opened up and we're seeing all the gray matter in there, a neurosurgeon would go, it's just daily stuff. And you're looking like, oh, this is gross. Or, when they're going to replace a knee and they basically amputate the knee, it looks like a chicken bone thing hanging there and they're putting the stuff in and drilling. For an orthopedic surgeon, that's no big deal. But to the rest of us, we're throwing up in a bucket. And I think if people kind of think of it that way, like even a firefighter, you see this roaring flame and this, call it riding the dragon. You're going to go in and you're going to do what you got to do. And everybody else is going, are you crazy? That's the craziest stuff I've ever seen. They're simply not exposed to it. Therefore, there's no frame of reference other than their own, which, going back to the police thing, they've probably been pretty protected. And that's really where police, I think, education and citizens police academies and different things like that would help bridge that gap there that's obviously stirred up tremendous emotion around the country right now. And I see a lot of mental health professionals, energetic people, ministers, police, fire, trying to help both ends of that stick.
Yes. So you don't think social workers should go take those calls, huh?
Well, all I can say is there's not very many jobs in the world where you put on a bulletproof vest, hook up a 40 cal Glock, and you got an AR-15 and you got a 12 gauge shotgun. See you, honey, I'm going to work.
Right.
How many people do that? You either got the military or the popo, and that's it. And
That's right.
The social worker, I think there's a place for the social worker, but emergency response, I don't want to see a 6-inch blade go in their rib cage.
No.
Because that's what we're dealing with. It's really, really ugly, and they're not exposed to it. And the most of them I've talked to clinicians and said, "Hey, you ready to hop in the squad car?" They're like, "Are you crazy out of your mind? Who's making this stuff up?"
No, that's right.
Well, it's certainly not clinicians and it's not police. It's somebody else who really doesn't know, the mechanics of all this. And, people train in different life jobs, going to the police academy and, 4 years of college and maybe military background to eventually become a police officer. Then you're field trained for another 6 months. And then you're a rookie for, the rest of the year, and you got to meet all these standards, and you're trained all the time, constantly training. It would be no different than somebody coming in and trying to be a psychologist by, taking the first year freshman course and say, "Oh, I can hang a shingle. I can do this." Not a big deal. Watching a little bit of TV with
right, the TV psychologist.
TV psychologist, I can have this whipped out in half an hour. And so I think any profession of any grade would take offense to somebody saying, "I can be a psychologist. That's not a big deal. Hell, who can't do that? You're just talking to people and trying to give them good advice." Well, that's far from it. But if that's all then that's, I'm not blaming them for not understanding it. I think we need to have a realization. And for the first responders, we're talking about their stress. They also have to realize that these folks don't do what you do. You guys are heroes. I mean, you're walking, talking, warrior class people who go do the most dangerous stuff in the world. Don't think a thing about it because you've been properly initiated into it, trained for it. You're almost dulled down to where it's no big deal. But when people don't understand that, it's, I think, very frustrating. And I get a lot of them too. And police officers that have been shot at, and nobody understands that, what it's like, and they're leaving their jobs. And so both of you guys are, I'm sure, getting that as well.
Absolutely. And the way, one of the things that I'm interested in particular is just how that affects people mentally. And really, it's about the mind and being able to be kind of take control or take charge of your thoughts. Because when you think about even things energetically, and positivity, negativity, it's real easy for those negative thoughts to creep in and take over, and that spirals someone real quick in a negative direction. Or maybe they've been had patterns in their life. A pattern has been kind of solidified where they're really in a negative place, and so being able to help them understand and really harness the power of their mind. Biblically speaking, that would be called renewing your mind. You can look at that in different ways. And then mindfulness, meditation and things, that's a big kind of area that's being introduced more to people with trauma. And, and that for some people that can be pretty scary, and they don't have quite, the tools that they need or understand what it is. But really it's about being present in the moment, and accepting what's coming. And there's a lot of healing that can take place with that. And there's also, to me, a connection with spirituality if someone so chooses, because just allowing and accepting what is and kind of, giving that up to a higher power, if that's important to them, then it's almost like they stop feeling responsible and, feeling like they have to control everything. but instead they could give it up to God, and God can control it. I think that's why in addictions, for example, that can be so powerful. Someone who integrates that spirituality.
Absolutely. So, I always tell people, you need to fill up from the inside first. You're not going to get your hit from the outside. I mean, that's never going to happen. If you're not settled and in peace, that doesn't mean you're not going to have points where you're going to have, some kind of anger flare up or righteous indignation, should I say, that you need to express. And I say, vent it out, get done with it, and move on, because you can't. It's much like a bird lighting in a tree is the anger thing, and let it fly on. Don't let it make a nest there, or you're going to have an energetic problem.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's huge, and they're good with that. So, Tom, what else you got?
To that point, to just go a little further with that, what they don't realize is by allowing that to fester that way, they've given the other person or the other situation the full control over them.
Yes.
Instead of just letting it go, it loses its power when you let it go.
That's right. That's right.
But it can be tough for people to come to that place because they just want to give you a beating first.
That's right. But that's really the true freedom. So, we're doing that, your mind, letting go. That's where you gain the freedom. So it's kind of ironic that way. But that's what I see over and over.
I keep it really simple with people. What's this going to mean to you in 3 to 6 months? And if you tell me nothing, then what are you hanging on to it for? If you tell me it's something, then fight for it. It's really simple.
Yep, absolutely.
Try to boil it down to simplicity.
Right.
That's right.
But, I was working with a guy the other day, and there was a sense that he was going to potentially commit suicide. And, it had run in the family and friends and that sort of thing. And he got exposed to a really serious situation with a death situation. And, it couldn't sleep and things were showing up in his vision at night and next to his bed in his bedroom. And, just really bad. I mean, by the time I got a hold of him, many, many hours without sleeping. And, that messes your brain up to begin with. But of course, what I found was, and Americans, and you guys can address this, but it went all the way back to when he was a little kid. And it oftentimes does, because I'll jump them right back to when they're about, because I'm a master hypnotherapist and that kind of thing. So I tend to go that way very quickly. And I jump back to when he's 5 years old and there's things going on in his family that he started to believe that were false. He incorporated them into the truth, his truth. And once we took that out, and he was perfectly fine. And so I think in America, we are terrible about preparing our children for death as compared to places in the Eastern culture where it's just, that's just a part of life. It's death. But here, I mean, you're used to have grandma would be, when she died, she'd be in the upstairs bedroom sitting there, we're not sitting there, but, laid out, and people would come and visit, and bring food and whatnot. Now it's sterilized, they're taken immediately to the hospital or to the morgue or to the funeral home. And then they're 3 days later, you're doing all the services. And so we're completely separated. And so little kids aren't allowed to go because they're going to get scared seeing grandma laying there. And then when they become adults, they've never been attuned to this stuff. They're not ready for it. And they're like freaking out, like there is no God, there is no this, there is no that. And I'm just, going to kill myself. I asked one guy, it was funny as heck. He was a funny guy. He was a laborer, he hands-on guy, really, and it was successful and everything. And he goes, well, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then finally goes, and then I'm going to jump off a bridge. And I said, well, great. And what are you going to do next? He goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, after you jump off the bridge. I said, then what are you going to do? And he goes, well, I guess I hadn't thought about that. I said, well, is that a good move or a bad move? And he goes, well, I guess thinking of it that way, it's probably a bad move, because I said, well, you're still going to have to deal with your junk. You're going to be dead, more than likely, but you're still going to have to deal with your junk. And really? And I said, well, yeah, you don't get off the hook that easy. And he's like, okay, I guess I don't want to do that. And I said, yeah, it's a lot easier to do when you're walking around in some skin and bones.
Right.
Do it than walking around in an astral body, that kind of thing. So anyway, I don't know if you guys have run across this lack of understanding about death. That's just been huge. I've just got tons of that through the years.
Disconnection, and in general, And another thing I notice now with all this COVID, that's hit and everything people are dealing with, there's in general, a lot of people, a sense of dread, fear, impending doom, really stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
And when somebody doesn't have, it doesn't even acknowledge maybe that the unseen could be there, and that they don't have, spirituality of any kind, it's really tough. It's tough because, if the world is, things aren't looking so good, then, they become hopeless. It's pretty easy to see how that happens.
Yeah, and I really think a lot of the media is almost what I would call, if I get biblical now, the Leviathan Spirit. Leviathans were thought of as, it's like a worldwide spirit, basically, but you think of them as crocodiles, the ancient Egyptians did. And, what do those do? What do crocodiles, alligators do? They come up behind you, they snap on you, then they roll and they spin and they separate different parts and pieces, and then they devour at their leisure. I think the American people are the victims of some kind of Leviathan spirit, and it seems to be media driven right now. So I think I often tell clients, I say, listen to the morning news if you like, listen to it in the evening if you like, but just really don't fill your day with it, because it's negative hit after negative hit after negative hit. We are designed for that. You need to see some pretty kittens and puppies playing, and some pretty babies making funny joys. That's fun stuff. And, that really makes a register. I mean, even if, just like you said, thoughts are things, those are things getting thrown out there in the atmosphere.
Yes.
And we're absorbing them. And I'm getting people coming in, and I had 10 people come in at one class, and every single one of them had both a headache and a tummy ache. And I said, okay, well, and I didn't even tell them I was doing it, but I just went through another process. And 5 minutes later, I said, so how's everybody's headache and tummy ache? And they're all like, it's gone. What happened? It's like that. But there was that energetic that's just like flowing through the atmosphere. And we know that happens. I mean, we've talked, Tom and I have talked about it before in some other podcasts about, the Japanese professor that talked really bad to the water crystals or water molecules, and they got all ugly.
Yes.
Love to them, and they got really pretty.
Yes.
That's got to be happening with us. There's no question. We're far more complex than that. So we're picking more up.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing on that note, when people who know those things are happening to, and they don't even recognize it, but you might sense it and see it. So you kind of got to help them figure out some kind of way to help them through that. And also, when you think holistically in the mind, body, spirit, the garbage that people are eating, the, things in our atmosphere, all of that, are, in terms of the body, we have to kind of purge and cleanse as much as we can to be able to, have that positive energy, to be able to have those thoughts in the direction where we need them to be. Otherwise we will spiral. So all that stuff is connected. It's everything that we ingest, everything that's around us. All of those things, you can think about that in terms of vibration, energy. There is a subgroup in psychology now called energy psychology. So there is some, slow movement in that area where they're recognizing these things, but not everybody's there yet.
So Tom, she's telling me I am done with my hot dogs and Twinkies. I don't know how I'm going to live from this point on. But
I was going to say, the first thing that came to mind was the Jimmy Buffett song. Some people treat their bodies like a temple. He treats his like a tent. I try to find that happy medium.
Absolutely. So,
Yes.
I guess I would say that, Kathleen, if you were just going to address a group of 100 of your peers, and try to say, hey, this stuff I've run across, and here's how I've successfully done it. In a 1 minute burst, how would you address these 100 peers and say, here, do you really need to take a look at this?
Yeah, I think I would let them know that I would encourage them to have an open mind and to really almost approach things like a scientist. The unseen, there is a possibility that it is real, even though you can't see it or sense it with your five senses. And you need to be open about that, because there is a lot to be learned and potentially a lot to be gained from that. And certainly it's all about helping the clients, helping them, with their wellness and well-being. So, if you had access to this information, wouldn't you want to use it if it could help somebody?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, you didn't know what a psychologist did till you went to school, did you?
That's right.
You had
That's
to
right.
learn it. And this is just learning another piece of the greater world.
That's right. And so integrating in for spirituality, if someone has a belief in God, if it's important to them, then that's something that needs to be addressed. I think you're doing a disservice if you don't.
Right. Tommy?
Yeah, I think we're definitely starting to make the shift. We're starting to see it. You talk about the energy psychologists and such, and they're kind of creeping over. They're putting their toe in the water, so to speak, at this point. APA is starting to look at it to say it's okay. That's a big step forward for them, because I know they fought that for years, but there's a lot of peer-validated journals out there that are now showing that this is truly something that they need to look at, and there is some value to it.
Yes.
So we're moving in the right direction. It's just taking slower than we would like.
That's right. Keeping an open mind and listening and meeting people where they're at. That's the key, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I always say people have the answers. It's our job just to hold the mirror up and let them find them.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, if they get themselves out of their own way, they'll usually find it. And that's part of our job, just to let them step out of their own way.
That's right.
And, I know I've got some clients even this evening that I've got to deal with, and, that's part of it, and we'll be done quickly. And, I don't have time. I'm so, I know you guys are busy too. And so if we can find the methods that work and are quick, and I saw that one study, it was talking about, sit down, Freudian style psychoanalysis. You have to do hundreds of those things to get like 34% success rate. Then they talked about exposure to whatever the problem was, exposing and re-exposing. And you had to do like 24 sessions to get somewhere in the 56%. I don't know, the numbers are not exactly right, but somewhere like that. But then they even talked about hypnotherapy, though, with less than 6 tries, gets you in the upper 90th percentile. Now, hypnotherapy years ago was all voodoo. I mean, you couldn't do any of that, but it was a dirty little secret in the psychologist's office or the psychiatrist's office that they did anyway. And, call it, and then the preachers did it too. They call it deep prayer, whatever you want to call it. But, everybody's been doing it for centuries. We're just now finally getting the data to back it up. And I would much rather do 2 or 3 hypnotic sessions and they find their own answers than me sitting talking to somebody for 200 times.
That's right. And when somebody has a spiritual transformation, and sometimes that happens very spontaneously, right? But I feel like that's something that, there was a knock on the door and they answered it. Okay. That can happen to them. They just have to, maybe based on who they are or what they want in their life. And that spiritual transformation can happen instantaneously. Forget all the sessions and forget, all of the years at therapy. I've seen transformations happen, very, very quickly in the order of, an instant.
Yes, me too. And I know Tom has as well. Yeah. So, well, I think that about wraps up what all we wanted to talk about. Is anybody got any closing thoughts? We'll go around the room here. Tom, you got anything?
I just want to say thanks for Kathleen for coming on and sharing her experiences and her insights. I know having a clinical license, it can be dicey to start talking about this stuff. So to have the strength and fortitude to come out here and publicly tell people where you're coming from, I think that's huge. It's going to be helpful to a lot, to clients and to other clinicians, to maybe open that door to at least consider. There might be something else out there that we should take a look at.
Yes. Thank you.
Kathleen, you got anything?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that stands out to me today is how valuable it is for us to work together. All our different specialties, we're all like in our own corners. But I think when you look at things holistically and how complex we are and how many dimensions that are going on and all that, that it's important for us to work together and to serve. It's all about helping people, right? So meeting them where they're at, a person, but being able to come together, and there's an added benefit. There's strength in numbers with that.
Absolutely. And again, I want to thank you for coming on. And I do say that networking is what it's all about. I know Kathleen and I, we met years ago, and in a environment that allowed for networking, and it's how you get to know somebody, how you can trust them. If you are going to refer somebody, you really believe in this person, and vice versa, and so you feel very comfortable. And I would just encourage clinicians to get into those conferences and those things that maybe it's a little on the edge for you, and vice versa. People that are on the other one try to lean into the other more clinical situation from time to time. Because that's where you network with people, and they find out, you know what, you're actually a human. You have some really cool skills that I think my clients in the future, maybe currently, might benefit from. So, and that's what this is all about. I mean, these are all mysteries of the world, and here these are all things that are unseen. So metaphysical in nature, above physical, as they would say. And that's what the Metaphysical podcast is all about, and trying to solve some of those mysteries. So for all our listeners and viewers, man, I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen. And we will be in contact with some new guests. And then one of them's coming up is from the National Missing and Exploited Children's Network, and how they use psychics to help solve cases, which now those are in the hundreds. And I think she's going to talk about how that's all done. So for those of you that can come back next time around, we appreciate that. And we will sign off for now for Tom and I and Kathleen here at the Metaphysical Mysteries. Thanks so much, and have a great day.